Hi, hello, and welcome. Hi. Let's just learn something together, shall we? Something I've learned in my education as a psychology student. I'm in my first master year of clinical psychology for adults and elderly people. We recently had an interesting course about a topic, and I want to share it with you. And that topic is behavioral activation therapy. It's a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is a very well-known form of therapy in the therapy landscape and the psychology landscape in general. And the main premise of this model of therapy is that behavior, context, and mood, all three of those, they are linked. Now, we think most of the time that our mood influences our behavior, but our behavior also strongly influences our mood, so it's also the other way around, but a lot of people tend to forget that. Now, things happen in our life and they make it difficult to get access to the experiences that we normally derive joy from. That's of course not so good for us. This positivity that we normally derive from those experiences can be in a form of pleasure. It's like pure pleasure, just happiness in the moment, or it could be like a deeper form of pleasure, which is found in mastery, or they call that mastery at least. That's the feeling you get when you, for example, have been working on that hard paper for months and you finally submit it, and it feels nice as well. So that's also a positive feeling, but it differs a bit from the pleasure feeling when, for example, you eat something nice. You eat fries, for example. Very nice, like fries. Now, normally these experiences would serve as kind of like a buffer for negativity and depression, and they are very much needed for stabilizing our mental well-being. It will not come as a surprise for you, therefore, that diminishing those experiences that normally give us positivity is gonna be negative for us. It deteriorates our mood and it makes us go into like an avoidance-focused mode of behavior. Now, what I mean by that is people tend to stay at home more often. They lock themselves up. Well, what's the use of anything if the experiences don't give you positivity anymore, so you don't undertake any experiences at all? This might seem positive in the short term, but it has negative long-lasting effects, and therefore it is a continuing factor for depression, actually, which means that it keeps the depression going, in simple terms. That pattern of avoidance behavior being good for you in the short term, or at least you think that it's good for you, but it's actually being bad in the long term, that's a really, really common pattern for avoidance behaviors in all different types of psychopathology. But in short term, the basis where cognitive behavioral therapy is formed upon is that something happens, it affects our mood and behavior, and depression can form from that, because depression and mood and behavior are of course heavily intertwined too. Now, sooner or later, when these kind of situations happen where the positive experiences are diminishing, people will get trapped in vicious cycles. Those vicious cycles will make their mood deteriorate even further and further, inducing less and less behavior. Even if it's valued behavior or not, it doesn't matter, they just will stop doing a bunch of things. Now, this actually drives them deeper and deeper into their own personal black hole, and that's something we want to prevent, of course. We want to reverse the vicious cycle, and a very important step in that is taking small steps. Divide the tasks up into manageable pieces, and sooner or later a snowball effect will start to occur where the smaller steps will turn into bigger and bigger steps, and the ball will keep rolling and it will roll you out of your depression, which is of course a bit of a euphemism that way, but you get the gist of what I'm meaning. The problem is often, however, that doing those small steps still feels aversive. People don't experience their mood clearing up immediately, because when you are, for example, someone with social anxiety and you need to go into small steps to improve that, go into social occurrences, of course, will not make you feel better in the moment. It will just have an aversive effect of you. You will feel bad, and that's going to be a major factor in dropout out of behavioral activation therapy. And that's where you as a therapist come in, because you need to be like a source of motivation for the client, and you also need to be transparent about it and warn them that that kind of things can happen. It's a difficult stage in the program of behavioral activation, those first couple of steps. And there, I guess the analogy with a snowball is true again, because, well, if you're trying to make a snowman, getting that first snowball is of course the hardest part, because after that you can just roll and the ball's own momentum will carry it forward, but you need to take those first steps to actually form the ball. Now, the main premise of the therapy itself, we talked about the basis, what it's built upon, but the main premise of the program itself is we are going to discover together with the client where that avoidance behavior is situated and which barriers there are for this client specifically, but also which values the client appreciates and which routines have been broken, and from there out which behaviors would be more beneficial for the client to perform more often. That's a lot of factors combined into just that one small important part at the end. We want to look at which behaviors would be beneficial for the client, and we want to empower those behaviors, and that's why it's called behavioral activation therapy. We want to really get the patient or the client to be active again, because those behaviors provide positive reinforcement, and that's also going to induce a positive mood for the client. Now, we also try to restore their routines, because this is important in mental well-being in general. I think you can definitely feel that for yourself when, for example, you're used to eating cereal for breakfast every day, but then all of a sudden one day the cereal box is empty and you don't have a new one. I think that's maybe a bit of a childish example, but you can definitely feel that delivers a bit of friction for your mental well-being. No, the main role for us as a therapist here is not a coach or a teacher. No, we want to be a detective, and we want to be cooperating with our client in that detection process. We try to find out together with them which experiences are beneficial and which experiences align the most with their goals, their own goals. This quality also makes this form of therapy very, very idiosyncratic. It's really individually tailored. It's for this specific person. Important in this process is careful activity monitoring by the client so that we can figure out which activities induce positive reinforcements and are valuable. Activity monitoring means, for example, that the client has to keep track of a list of different times of the day. Like you have a piece of paper and you have 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, things like that. And next to each time slot they have to write the behavior they were doing. And this can also be laying in bed or looking to a wall. It can be anything. Often people think they are just doing nothing at all, but the nothing is actually something, and we need to emphasize that as well for the client. So they need to write what they were doing and then also a score, how that affected their mood, and that's most of the time delivered from 1 to 10. And then we get this data from our client and we will use that to actually set up a functional analysis of their behavior. This is to figure out the importance, the function and consequences of client behavior, and we will then use this information to align our treatment plan to the specific client. This broad process is what we actually call guided activation, and it's one of the main components of behavioral activation. It is where we figure out where to best focus the activation, and also the process of partitioning the tasks in small steps. That's also a part of guided activation, and it really makes up the main body of this form of therapy. Now, the approach is actually fairly straightforward, and it has proven to be effective, or it is evidence-based in psychology research terms. It's pretty clearly structured too. Often, at the start of each session, an agenda is set up wherein the therapist will have a lot to say at first, but gradually the client will be more deciding about what happens in therapy. And that's also a component of making them more active again, like they get to decide for themselves what's gonna happen in the therapy. So yeah, in short, we try to figure out together with the client which behavior really empowers them, which behavior is positive for them, aligns with their values, aligns with what they want from life, and we're gonna try to make them commit more to that behavior, try to set that up again. We're also gonna try to repair their broken routines, because that's also important for positive well-being. And in general, we just want to induce more pleasure and mastery by providing them with the behaviors that they stopped, that they are avoiding now, but really get them back into them so that the behaviors can retain their buffering function against negative emotionality and depression in the more serious cases, of course. Now, as a final remark about behavioral activation, it's quite an intensive toolkit. It employs a lot of homework, which is characteristic for cognitive behavioral therapy in general. These are like tasks for the client to complete between sessions. Most of the work is really done between the sessions because you need to, of course, employ what the therapist told you in your daily life to actually have an effect of therapy. And this homework is not really just as simple as do more activities or go out for a run or something, because if it was that simple, well, people wouldn't come to therapy, they would just solve it themselves. Sadly, of course, life is no fairy tale, and depression is extremely prevalent, and especially in Western countries and high-income countries. Relapse is also more of a rule than an exception. A lot of people go through multiple depressive episodes in their life. But this technique of behavioral activation could be an important way of stopping that relapse or relapse prevention. One of the key components of this technique that speaks to me the most is the focus on the positive things in life, positive reinforcement and valuable behavior. We want to employ the strengths of our patient. If he used to get a lot of strength and empowerment out of swimming, let him go swimming. We really focus individually on this specific client and not only on his problems, but we also focus on the things that he still has in his life. And this really speaks to me as a person just, and as a future therapist, maybe, who knows. Because it is a nice breather from all the symptom and illness focused things we normally study. To repeat myself one more time, behavioral activation therapy, part of cognitive behavioral therapy. We look for activities together with the client. We are a detective here, and we try to emphasize activities that give them positive values and align with their personal values. Activity monitoring is very important for us to be able to set up our treatment plan, and it could be very useful in relapse prevention. Hope you learned something.